It started with a sound no one else could hear, a soft hiss beneath the morning birdsong, like the earth itself was exhaling through cracked teeth. I stood at the base of the dam, boots sinking in the damp silt, watching a thin silver thread of water snake its way through the concrete seam. The air smelled of wet moss and arrogance, because up the hill, the HOA board was already setting up for their Saturday brunch, congratulating themselves on how picturesque the lake looked. I recorded the leak with my phone, zoomed in, and said, "That's the sound of a lawsuit waiting to happen." It would have been funny if it weren't so terrifying. The dam was old, patched a dozen times by the cheapest bidder, and this mountain lake sat high above all of us like a loaded gun. I tried to warn them last week, when I first noticed the dark vein forming along the spillway. Karen, the HOA president, had squinted at me like I was speaking a foreign language, then told me to submit concerns through proper channels. Proper channels. That was HOA code for ignore until it collapses. When I walked back to my cabin that morning, I passed the HOA beautification project, sign half buried in mud, and couldn't help but laugh. They'd spent $20,000 on lakeside benches no one used, but not a dime on the dam that held the whole lake up. The irony was thicker than the fog rolling off the water. I made coffee, sat on my porch, and listened to the faint groaning coming from the concrete wall in the distance. It was like the mountain itself was warning me. I decided to drive up to the HOA clubhouse one last time, mostly to satisfy my conscience before the inevitable happened. Inside, the usual suspects were gathered around their polished walnut table, Karen in her pastel sweater, Bob the treasurer checking golf scores, and two others arguing about mailbox height. "You again," Karen sighed when I walked in. "What is it this time?" "Another conspiracy about drainage." I laid out the photos I'd taken that morning, close-ups of the crack, the moisture line, the leaking seam. "That's not drainage," I said. "That's pressure. The dam's failing." Bob chuckled without looking up. "Maybe your cabin's foundation's just tilting your perspective." The laughter that followed was the kind that makes you want to grab people by the shoulders and shake them awake. I didn't. I just gathered my photos, said, "When it goes, it's taking all of us with it," and left. Outside, I saw the sheriff's truck parked by the road. Dale leaned against it, sipping coffee. "You're back on your crusade again, huh?" he said, half grinning. "I'm telling you, Dale, that dam's giving." He tipped his hat. "That old thing's been giving since Reagan was in office. You worry too much." I stared past him at the water shimmering behind the dam. The lake looked calm, innocent even, the way a rattlesnake looks before it strikes. I wanted to believe him, to just forget about it, but something in me couldn't. Maybe it was the way the wind whistled through that valley, the faint vibration in the ground, or maybe it was just the memory of my grandfather telling me, "Water's patient boy, it always wins." I drove back home and spent the afternoon stacking sandbags around the lower part of my cabin, just in case. My dog Scout watched me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. I went down to the creek again at sunset. The air had that heavy stillness that settles before a storm. The crack had widened. The trickle was now a steady leak, darkening the concrete like a spreading bruise. I touched the wall. It was trembling faintly, like a heartbeat. "They're not going to believe it until it's too late," I muttered. And sure enough, as I headed back up the path, I saw a small crowd gathering by the dam, wine glasses in hand, laughing as Karen gave some speech about community pride. She actually pointed at the dam and called it a symbol of HOA excellence. I almost choked. The only thing that kept me from yelling was the absurdity of it all. There they were, clinking glasses on the very structure that would soon drown their flower bed. When lightning flashed far off in the clouds, no one noticed but me. That night I couldn't sleep. Rain started tapping against the roof, soft at first, then heavier. I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the dam lights flicker on the lake's surface. Around midnight, a low rumble rolled through the valley. I stepped outside in my raincoat and saw the spillway water surging faster than I'd ever seen. The leak had turned into a fountain, spraying mist under the floodlights. I recorded it again, voice shaking as I whispered, "This is it." I called Karen, no answer. I texted Dale, no reply. I even emailed the HOA emergency contact line, which probably forwarded to some inbox labeled, "Ignore." By 3 a.m., the rain turned torrential. Thunder cracked like cannon fire, echoing off the ridges. I drove my truck closer to the dam just to see it one more time. The road was slick, the air thick with the smell of wet clay and ozone. When I reached the overlook, headlights cut through the mist, revealing a jagged fissure crawling across the dam face. My stomach dropped. Water was pulsing through it in bursts now, each stronger than the last. For a split second, I thought of turning back and pretending I hadn't seen it. But then a sound like a gunshot split the night. The crack widened, a section of concrete sheared away, and a roar filled the valley so deep it rattled my teeth. I floored the gas and tore back toward my cabin as a wall of white water thundered behind me. Branches, debris, even pieces of fence slammed into the current. In the rearview mirror, the dam lights went dark one by one, swallowed by the flood. When I finally reached higher ground, I killed the engine and sat there shaking, watching the valley below fill with chaos. The HOA clubhouse lights flickered like drowning fireflies before vanishing completely. Somewhere down there, a car alarm wailed before being silenced by the rising water. I stepped out into the rain, heart pounding, and whispered to the night, "I told you so." The words felt hollow. The mountain didn't care, the lake didn't care, and the only witnesses were the storm and my trembling hands clutching a phone still recording. I didn't know it yet, but that footage would soon go viral, turning their laughter into the internet's favorite cautionary tale. But for now, I just stood in the rain, staring into the valley, listening to the sound I'd tried to warn them about, water finally winning. By morning the storm had passed, leaving behind a valley that looked like a battlefield made of mud and twisted lumber, but somehow the dam still stood, wounded but not dead, holding back what was left of the lake behind it. The air smelled of wet concrete and ozone, and the silence was thick except for the dripping of water from the trees. I hadn't slept, just stared at the ceiling all night, waiting for the sound of collapse that never came. When the sun rose, I drove down to the HOA clubhouse, expecting chaos, maybe panic, maybe even guilt. What I found instead was Karen standing at the front steps with a clipboard, directing people like nothing had happened. "We're assessing minor storm impacts," she said cheerfully, as if the dam hadn't nearly split open 6 hours ago. Her hair was perfect, makeup intact, not a hint of concern on her face. Behind her, Bob and 2 other board members were inspecting the dam from a distance with lawn chairs and binoculars. They looked like birdwatchers, not people standing in front of a structural ticking time bomb. I parked my truck, grabbed the same camera I'd used the night before, and walked straight up to them. "That wall is about to give," I said. "You need to call the county engineer, not just stare at it." Bob didn't even look at me. "We had our guy look it over," he said. "He says it's fine." I blinked. "Your guy? Who's your guy?" Karen smiled like she'd been waiting for that question. "We contracted maintenance services to a local company, Peak Lake Improvements, very reputable." I knew that name. It was her husband's LLC, the same one that fixed the parking lot lights by duct taping the wiring to a fence post. I laughed, actually laughed out loud, but there was no humor in it. "You mean the one-man operation that operates out of your garage?" She straightened her clipboard like it was a shield. "Don't be rude, Mark. He's licensed." "He's a carpenter," I said. "You're having a carpenter inspect a dam." Her smile didn't budge. "He's versatile." I swear if there was ever a moment to lose faith in organized human thought, that was it. I turned my phone toward the dam, zoomed in, and sure enough, the crack was now clearly visible even from this far. "That's not a leak anymore," I said. "That's structural failure." "We'll handle it internally," Karen said, dismissing me with a wave. "Please stop spreading panic." I stared at her, soaked, sleep-deprived, and half certain I was living in a comedy sketch written by fate. "Spreading panic?" I'm spreading water, I said. That dam is doing it all on its own. She didn't respond, just jotted something down on her clipboard. I realized then that she was writing me up again. Another fine, probably for disrupting HOA operations. And I was right. Later that day, I found the notice taped to my door. Unauthorized interference with HOA property integrity discussions, $250. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Instead, I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the porch watching the repair crew arrive. 3 men in neon vests, 1 pressure washer, 2 buckets of waterproof paint, and a portable speaker blasting country music. That was the HOA's emergency response team. They set up folding chairs near the spillway, and one of them, a kid barely old enough to shave, started painting over the cracks like he was covering graffiti. Another used the pressure washer to clean the dam wall while water still gushed from beneath it, which, if you've ever known anything about pressure cracks, is about as effective as painting a sinking ship. I filmed everything. I even narrated it like a wildlife documentary. Here we observe the majestic HOA in its natural habitat, displaying the ancient ritual of denial. Notice the male attempts to patch the wound using camouflage paint. My friend Tom called around noon. "You still alive down there?" he asked. Tom was a retired civil engineer who used to work with county infrastructure. I told him what happened, sent him the footage, and waited for the sound of his laugh. But he didn't laugh. "That's not patchable," he said. "That's a sheer fault. You need to get higher ground." I told him I'd already tried to warn them, and he said, "Then document everything. When it goes, you'll need proof." That phrase, "when it goes," hit me like a cold wind. Not if, when. By mid-afternoon, the HOA crew had finished painting over the worst of the cracks, then posed for photos with Karen for the newsletter. She called it the HOA Lake Restoration Project. The sheer audacity of it all was dizzying. That evening, the sun came out, casting a golden reflection on the lake, and for a moment it was easy to forget the danger. Families were out walking their dogs, kids throwing stones at the shallows. Life went on as if the mountain wasn't holding its breath. I stood by the water's edge, staring at the dam, feeling that deep unease again, the kind that settles in your gut when you know something's coming and no one else does. Karen came strutting down the trail in her pastel jacket, holding a glass of white wine. "See?" she said, gesturing at the dam. "All fixed. You can relax now." I followed her gaze. From a distance, the paint job did make the wall look solid again. But closer inspection told the truth. The paint was already bubbling from the moisture underneath. "You just painted over evidence," I said. She smiled, clinking her glass. "We painted over negativity." I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. Later that night, I got another fine in my email for filming HOA workers without consent. I realized they were trying to bury me in paperwork, to make me so tired of fighting that I'd give up. But I wasn't the one living below a ticking bomb. They were. Around midnight, I drove back down to the dam and parked with my headlights off. The moon was out, pale and sharp, and the lake's surface looked like glass. I walked down the slope with my flashlight and placed my palm against the wall again. The vibration was stronger now, subtle but constant, like a pulse you could almost sync your breathing to. Somewhere behind that wall, thousands of gallons were pressing for escape. I turned off the flashlight and just listened, the soft hiss of water through the crack, the quiet murmur of wind in the pines, the far-off sound of laughter from the clubhouse up the hill. It felt surreal, standing there knowing the truth while they toasted to their illusion of control. The next morning, the HOA sent out a cheerful email blast. "Lakefront successfully restored. No danger to residents. Please refrain from sharing false information on community channels." They even attached a photo of Karen smiling in front of the freshly painted dam, holding her clipboard like a trophy. I stared at it for a long time, then attached it to my growing evidence folder. I didn't know how long the dam had left, but I knew this. When it went, no one would be able to say they hadn't been warned. The cover-up was complete, the stage was set, and the next storm would write the rest of the story for us. By the time the first autumn rain came, the ground around the dam had already started to sag like a soaked sponge, but no one seemed to notice or care except me and the old man who walked his beagle there every morning. The HOA had declared victory weeks ago, painting over the cracks and holding a lake safety celebration barbecue that somehow cost more than the entire repair budget. They even hung a banner that said, "Pride in our property." It flapped in the wind above the dam like a bad joke. The lake itself looked different now, murkier, angrier, the waterline higher than I'd ever seen it. It pressed up against the shore, swallowing the roots of pine trees, gnawing slowly at the edges of driveways and lawns. Every day I drove past, the hum beneath the dam grew stronger, a deep vibrating murmur that you could feel in your ribs if you stood close enough. I told myself I'd done all I could, but the truth was I couldn't stop watching it, like someone staring at a candle flame waiting for it to gutter out. When the rain started to pour that week, it felt like the mountain itself was testing the limits of their arrogance. Thunder rolled through the valley, and streams turned into rivers overnight. The HOA sent out another chirpy email. Weather update. Minor overflow expected, no risk to residents. That line made me laugh so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Tom called me again that night. "You're not going to like this," he said, voice tight. I looked up the dam's maintenance records. They haven't filed an inspection with the county in 6 years. 6? I said. Karen said it was serviced last spring. He snorted. The last record is a form submitted by her husband's company. No signatures. No engineer's seal. Just a scanned page with a smiley face watermark. I'm not kidding. I leaned against the window watching sheets of rain blur the world outside. So it's fake. Fake as her HOA diploma, he said. Mark, you need to get that on record. Go to the sheriff tomorrow. I didn't sleep again that night. The storm hit harder around midnight, hammering the tin roof until it sang. At one point, the power flickered, and in that half-second of darkness, I imagined the sound of concrete tearing apart. I went outside with a flashlight, rain slapping my face, and pointed it toward the valley. The dam lights were faint through the storm, but what I saw made my stomach twist. The crack had spread wider than my hand. Water was spurting through in rhythmic pulses, like breath through broken lungs. I took photos, videos, even measured the flow with a stick I jammed into the base, marking how fast the water line was creeping up. By dawn, my boots were soaked, my nerves shot, and I had enough evidence to fill a courtroom. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Dale was there, sipping coffee like he didn't live downstream from a concrete grenade. I dropped the folder on his desk. "It's happening," I said. He opened it lazily, flipping through soaked photos and my shaky handwriting. "You sure this isn't just runoff?" "Runoff doesn't come through solid concrete," I said. "This is pressure bleed. You need to evacuate the lower lots before the next storm." He sighed, rubbed his temples. "You're asking me to sound an alarm that'll panic 200 people and tank property values. I can't do that on a hunch." I stared at him, disbelief burning through my exhaustion. "A hunch? That hunch has a timestamp, a photo, and your signature from last time you told me to relax." He didn't answer. I left the folder on his desk and walked out, rain pounding the hood of my jacket. Back home, I sent copies of everything to the county engineering office and even the local news station. No one replied. The next day, the HOA posted another notice on the community board accusing certain residents of spreading false rumors to undermine neighborhood trust. My name wasn't on it, but it didn't need to be. People started looking at me differently. Neighbors I'd helped dig out of snowstorms suddenly crossing the street to avoid me, parents pulling their kids away when I walked by. Karen's influence was poison, and she wielded it like a queen defending her throne. That weekend, the clouds parted briefly, sunlight breaking through like mercy. The lake shimmered with deceptive calm, its surface smooth as glass. The HOA took the chance to host another event, Autumn Lake Appreciation Day. I watched from my porch as golf carts rolled down to the clubhouse loaded with food trays, kids in rain boots, and Karen in a bright red jacket that made her look like she was leading a parade. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my camera, drove down, and parked near the maintenance shed. From there, I filmed the entire gathering, the laughter, the music, the wine glasses clinking under the same dam wall that was leaking steadily behind them. A few people noticed me and whispered, but I didn't care. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about the fact that no one was taking this seriously. Around 4 p.m., the rain started again, light at first but steady. Karen made a little speech about community resilience, while the ground under her literally squished from saturation. I watched the water level rise by inches as the spillway overflowed. Kids splashed in puddles that weren't puddles anymore but runoff channels from the hillside. I wanted to scream, to grab them all and drag them uphill. Instead, I walked up to Karen one last time. "It's going to break," I said quietly. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. You still have time to move, everyone." She smiled, that same condescending smile that could curdle milk. "Mark, you've let your imagination ruin your piece. The boards handled it. Please stop scaring people." "Handled it?" I said, pointing toward the dam. "It's literally leaking behind you." She turned, squinting at the faint spray of water shining in the sunlight. "That's just surface drainage. You really should stop obsessing." I wanted to say something cruel then, something about how denial doesn't float, but I stopped myself. What was the point? They'd already decided what was true. As the event wrapped up and the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind, walking to the dam alone. The paint from their last repair was flaking away, revealing dark spiderwebs of cracks beneath. Water pulsed through in short bursts, making a steady hiss that grew louder with every step I took. I leaned on the railing, watching the current churn below, and thought about how fragile everything built on arrogance eventually becomes. A single bad decision, a single ignored warning, and the mountain would take it all back. When lightning flickered on the horizon, I turned to leave, and that's when I saw the first real sign of what was coming. The earth at the dam's right base had sunk by almost a foot. The slope was shifting. I knelt, touched the soil, and felt it trembling faintly, like it was breathing. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding. The next storm would do it. It wasn't a question anymore. That night, I uploaded all the footage online, labeled it HOA Cover-Up, Cracked Dam in Pine Ridge Community. I didn't expect much, maybe a few views, a few angry emails. By morning it had 50,000 views, then 100. The comments were a mix of disbelief and outrage. "These idiots are gonna drown themselves," one said. Another, "That man's a hero." But none of them lived here. None of them would be here when the lake finally decided it had enough of our stupidity. I sat on my porch, listening to the thunder build again in the distance, and whispered to myself, "Let them laugh one more time. Just once more." You said. The storm came without warning this time, roaring over the ridge like a beast that had been waiting too long to wake. The sky turned the color of iron, and rain started in thick sheets that blurred the valley into a watercolor of gray and silver. From my porch I could barely see the lake, only the faint glow of the dam lights flickering through the curtain of water. The air smelled of ozone and mud, and the wind carried the distant groan of something massive under strain. I knew that sound now. I'd been hearing it in my sleep for weeks. By the time I reached my truck, the road was already slick with runoff, water streaming across it like veins. The tires hissed as I drove toward the dam, heart pounding with every bump and sway. Thunder cracked so close it made the windshield vibrate. When I crested the hill overlooking the lake, I saw it. The water had risen nearly to the top of the dam, the spillway roaring like a white river. What stopped my breath was the dark streaks running down the face of the wall, thin black trails that widened as I watched. The dam wasn't just leaking now. It was bleeding. Down by the clubhouse, the HOA was still holding their monthly meeting, lights glowing warm and steady inside while the world outside was dissolving. Karen's SUV was parked in its usual spot, spotless as ever. I parked by the road and ran through the rain, camera in hand, yelling before I even hit the porch. "You need to get out!" I shouted as I burst through the door. Everyone turned, startled. "What on earth?" Karen snapped, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "The dam's failing," I said. "Right now. You can hear it." She frowned, clearly annoyed more than afraid. "Mark, we've been over this. We are in the middle of an important—" Another sound cut her off, a deep crack that rolled through the building like thunder from beneath the floor. Glasses rattled, a painting slipped sideways on the wall, and for the first time, I saw fear flash across her face. "That's not thunder," I said quietly. Outside, the rain intensified, pounding so hard it felt like the sky was collapsing. We ran out onto the porch, and what I saw froze me in place. The center of the dam had buckled inward, just slightly, but enough to create a bow that shimmered under the floodlights. Water was now shooting out in twin geysers from the seams, mist spraying into the air. The sound was deafening. Bob shouted something, but it was swallowed by the roar. Karen turned to the small crowd of HOA members who had followed us out. "Everyone stay calm," she yelled, as if calm could hold back gravity. "Call 911. I shouted, already sprinting toward my truck. The road down to the dam was turning into a river. Mud splashed up to my knees as I ran, the flashlight beam shaking wildly in my hand. When I reached the maintenance gate, the noise was beyond human scale, a grinding, groaning bellow as concrete tore against itself. The wall had split open in a jagged line, and through it I could see the swirling, furious water behind, churning like a caged animal. I backed away, tripping over a fallen branch just as the first slab gave way. It didn't explode, it folded like a door being kicked from its hinges. A torrent burst through, white and unstoppable, and the valley below filled with the sound of annihilation. I scrambled to my feet, mud soaking into my jeans, and ran uphill toward my truck. I could feel the vibration in the ground now, deep and constant, the earth humming like a live wire. The water hit the lower spillway and jumped it like it wasn't even there. Logs, debris, full sections of fence were tossed like toys. My truck barely started through the downpour, tires spinning as I fought for traction. In the mirror, I saw the lake collapsing into chaos, the flood eating its way down the valley. The clubhouse lights went out. The last thing I saw before the hill hid it from view was the roof lifting slightly, then vanishing under a surge of brown water. I didn't stop driving until I reached the ridge above my cabin, high enough to look down at the entire valley. The scene below looked unreal, like someone had poured the whole sky into the earth. The lake was gone, replaced by a roaring river tearing through what used to be lawns, gardens, driveways. Pieces of dock floated past, a red kayak spinning end over end like a leaf. I could see the glow of car headlights submerged and fading, the faint outline of the clubhouse roof twisting in the current before it crumbled. I stood in the rain, shaking, soaked to the bone, the sound of the flood filling the air like the roar of an endless train. Lightning flashed, and for a moment I saw everything in stark white, the dam in pieces, the valley carved open, and the mountain above watching in silence. I thought of all the times I'd been called paranoid, dramatic, a nuisance. I thought of every email ignored, every fine they'd taped to my door. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like mourning. Still, part of me wanted to yell, to scream it into the storm, "I told you." But even that would have been drowned out by the sound of the water. I didn't know how long I stood there before I saw the sheriff's cruiser pull up beside me, lights flashing dimly through the rain. Dale stepped out, hat soaked, eyes wide as he looked at the valley. "Jesus," he whispered. "It really went." I didn't answer. We just stood there, two men watching a community wash away, the air thick with the smell of earth and diesel and broken dreams. "How many were down there?" I asked finally. He swallowed hard. "Too many." The radio on his belt crackled with voices, urgent, chaotic. He got back in the car, speeding off toward the lower road, tires throwing mud. I stayed. My cabin was on high ground, safe, but that didn't mean much anymore. The rain finally began to ease, tapering to a drizzle. I walked to the edge of my property where the land dropped off, and I could see faint lights flickering far below, flashlights, maybe survivors. The valley was a lake again, but this time not the calm reflective one from before. This was a lake of ruin, brown and restless, filled with the wreckage of everything people thought they controlled. Somewhere beneath that water was the HOA clubhouse, Karen's SUV, all those fine notices with their neat signatures. I almost laughed at the thought of them floating somewhere out there like confetti. Then I felt the weight of what it all meant. The homes downstream, the animals, the people who hadn't believed me, not all of them deserved it. The price of arrogance wasn't just theirs. It was everyone's. I sat on the hood of my truck, rain dripping from the brim of my hat, and watched until the first light of dawn crept over the ridges, painting the destruction in pale gold. The water had started to calm, spreading wider and slower through the valley, carrying silence where there had been laughter hours ago. For the first time in weeks, the ground beneath my feet stopped trembling. The mountain had exhaled, and its patience was finally spent. By sunrise the rain had stopped completely, and what used to be the lake valley now stretched out like a scar through the mountain, a muddy wasteland where fences, cars, docks, and porch roofs lay tangled together in one long graveyard of debris. The air was heavy with the stench of silt and gasoline, and the silence was eerie, broken only by the distant hum of helicopters and the occasional groan of shifting wreckage. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the night pacing the porch, waiting for the sirens I knew would come. When they finally did, they sounded faint, hollow, like echoes from another world. I drove down the ridge slowly, tires crunching over the mud and broken branches, and every turn of the road revealed another level of ruin. The dam was gone entirely, ripped from its base like paper, and the once blue lake was now a flat brown basin littered with shattered trees. Near the old clubhouse, the ground looked like a blender had been taken to it, walls torn off, golf carts overturned, wooden beams sticking out at odd angles. A few neighbors stood knee-deep in the muck, holding trash bags or staring blankly at what used to be their homes. Karen's bright red jacket was easy to spot, even from a distance. She was standing near what used to be the HOA office, her clipboard gone but her posture still stiff and self-important, as if she could still organize the chaos into a meeting agenda. When she saw me, her expression changed from shock to hostility, like somehow this was still my fault. "You happy now?" she shouted over the noise of the rescue choppers. "You got your disaster." Her voice cracked halfway through, a mix of anger and something else, fear maybe, or guilt she didn't want to name. I stopped a few yards away, mud soaking my boots. "I warned you," I said quietly. 4 months. She shook her head violently, eyes red and puffy. "You scared everyone. You made it worse." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of that, but there was no humor left in me. Behind her, Bob was sitting on a piece of broken railing, staring at nothing. A fire truck splashed through the wreckage, followed by a sheriff's vehicle, and for a moment everything felt surreal. People in uniforms, the smell of diesel, Karen yelling something about liability forms. Sheriff Dale climbed out of his cruiser, looking like he hadn't slept either. His eyes met mine and he gave a slow shake of his head, not in anger, more in disbelief at what they'd all ignored. "We're setting up a perimeter," he said. "No one goes near the lower slope. It's unstable." Karen stepped toward him, her voice shrill again. "You need to arrest him," she said, pointing at me. "He's been talking about this for weeks, taking videos, stirring panic. For all we know, he tampered with it." Dale's eyes hardened. "Karen, stop." "No, listen," she snapped. "He wanted this to happen. He's been obsessed." He turned fully toward her then, hands on his hips. "You think he broke your dam with rainwater and gravity? You think he had the power to do that?" She faltered, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the right excuse. "We followed procedures," she finally muttered. "We maintained it." Dale sighed. "I saw your maintenance records. You painted it, Karen. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I turned away, scanning the devastation. The lakebed was strewn with household debris, picnic tables, coolers, even a child's tricycle half buried in the mud. Near the center of it all was what remained of the dam's core, a jagged spine of concrete surrounded by collapsed earth. I walked toward it slowly, each step squelching. The sound of helicopters faded behind me. Up close, the destruction was even worse. Rebar twisted out of the concrete like ribs from a carcass. The base had been hollowed by years of erosion, thin as cardboard in some places. I knelt beside one of the larger cracks and ran my hand along it, feeling the cold roughness of the exposed stone. It wasn't sabotage or bad luck that had done this. It was arrogance. Simple, stubborn arrogance dressed up as authority. When I looked back, I saw Dale speaking to a man in a yellow jacket, an insurance investigator, judging by the clipboard and camera. I watched as they gestured toward the dam, then toward Karen. She was yelling again, her hands waving in frantic circles, but the investigator wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me. A few minutes later, he walked over. "You're Mark, right? The guy who filmed everything." I nodded. "You mind if I see it?" I handed him my phone, already open to the video folder. He scrolled through the footage, his eyes narrowing at the timestamp. "You've been documenting this for weeks," he said. "Every stage of failure. That's thorough." "I tried to warn them," I said. "They called it defamation." He exhaled slowly, tapping something on his clipboard. "Well, they're going to call it negligence now." By noon, news vans had arrived, and reporters were wading through mud and rubber boots, pointing cameras at the dam's remains. I heard one of them say the phrase "avoidable tragedy," and another mutter "embezzled maintenance funds." It didn't take long for the story to spread. Someone must have leaked the videos to the press, because within hours, clips of Karen smiling beside the freshly painted dam were playing on every channel. "Community leader ignored repeated warnings," the headline said. The HOA's Facebook page went dark by evening, comments filled with outrage and disbelief. I should have felt vindicated, but as I stood there watching rescue crews pull a golf cart from the muck, I just felt tired. Later, Dale came by my cabin. His uniform was spattered with mud, eyes red from exhaustion. "We're going to need your footage officially," he said. "County wants everything." I handed him the drive I'd backed up earlier. "You'll find the emails too," I said. "She faked inspection records." He nodded grimly. "Yeah." Investigator found payments from the HOA account to her husband's company. No equipment purchases, no materials. Just checks labeled maintenance. Looks like the board was in on it. He paused before getting back into his truck. "You saved lives, you know. Without your warnings, a lot more people would have been down there." I didn't answer. I just looked toward the valley, where the floodwater was finally receding, revealing the outlines of driveways and rooftops coated in brown sludge. The sun had broken through the clouds now, lighting everything with a soft golden glow that made it all look almost peaceful if you didn't know what it used to be. Karen was sitting on the tailgate of a truck surrounded by reporters, her face pale and tight as she repeated the same lines: "Unexpected weather event, unforeseen conditions, no prior warning." I could almost admire her persistence, spinning control even as her kingdom sank in mud. When the reporters finally turned away, she looked up at me across the wreckage. Our eyes met for a moment, and there was no anger left in hers this time, just defeat, maybe even recognition. I gave a small nod, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement of the truth that neither of us could escape anymore. The mountain had settled its own argument, and there was no HOA rulebook that could find its way out of that. As the sun set that evening, the last of the rescue trucks rumbled off, leaving deep tire tracks in the soft ground. The air grew still again, quiet except for the drip of water from the trees. I stood by the ruined lakebed, listening to the faint gurgle of the stream that still flowed where the dam once stood. It sounded peaceful, almost cleansing, as if the land itself was beginning to heal while we were left to reckon with what we'd broken. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected, and by the next week the valley was crawling with county officials, engineers, and insurance teams taking measurements, scraping mud, and photographing every inch of the collapsed dam like a crime scene. The sound of drones filled the air, buzzing over the wreckage as reporters shouted questions at anyone who looked remotely in charge. I kept to myself mostly, standing near the ridge where my cabin overlooked the valley, watching as they uncovered layers of truth buried beneath the debris. From up here, you could see everything: the crooked skeleton of the dam's core, the scattered rooftops of what used to be lakefront homes, and the thin silver ribbon of water carving its own new path through the mud. It was strange how quickly nature erased human arrogance. What had taken decades to build had been undone in one night of storm and stubbornness. When the investigators called me down for questioning, I was ready. I brought every document, every photo, every video, all neatly time-stamped and printed, the same evidence I'd tried to shove under Karen's nose months ago. The lead investigator, a tall man with a sharp voice named Peters, didn't waste time with pleasantries. He pointed to one of the photos of the painted-over crack. "This is the repair job they claimed to complete last spring?" I nodded. "Yes. You can see the paint bubbling from moisture. They didn't patch anything, they just covered it." He scribbled a note. "We found forged inspection reports in the HOA's record. Your footage lines up perfectly with the dates they claimed work was completed. You're about to make a lot of lawyers very busy." I didn't feel pride when he said it, just a deep, exhausted sense of inevitability. It was like watching a slow domino fall that had started long before I ever moved into this valley. Later that afternoon, as I was walking back to my truck, I saw Karen for the first time since the flood. She was sitting on a folding chair near the temporary command post, wrapped in a blanket, her hair uncombed, eyes dull like someone who hadn't slept in days. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who used to parade around with her clipboard and perfect posture was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out by the weight of consequences. She saw me and looked away, her face crumpling slightly before she hid it behind her hand. I didn't approach. There was nothing left to say that the mountain hadn't already screamed for me. That evening, local news aired a segment titled, "The HOA That Ignored a Warning," and suddenly the story wasn't just ours. It was everywhere. My footage played over dramatic narration, showing the leaking dam, the cracks, and the final burst of water consuming the valley. Commentators called it a case study in neglect, and social media exploded with outrage. Within hours, the HOA's name became a national punchline. Memes of Karen standing proudly beside the freshly painted crack circulated online with captions like, "Everything's fine," and "Just a little rain." The flood had washed away more than property, it had drowned their reputation too. By the next morning, lawyers were already filing claims. Residents who had once laughed at me now lined up outside the temporary FEMA tent, waving photos and shouting about compensation. The sheriff told me quietly that the county was pressing criminal negligence charges against the HOA board, with potential fraud charges for the falsified inspection reports. I didn't celebrate. Watching them turn on each other was less satisfying than I thought it would be. It felt like watching the end of a long play where everyone forgot their lines and the stage burned down around them. Still, justice was justice, even if it arrived soaked in mud. Peters stopped by my cabin 2 days later. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, looking both grateful and uneasy. "You probably saved lives," he said. "Your videos gave us the timeline we needed. Without them, this would have been buried under a dozen insurance excuses." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Doesn't feel like saving much," I said. "Just feels like the inevitable finally caught up." He gave a small smile. "Maybe. But people like you make sure truth doesn't stay buried. Don't underestimate that." When he left, the silence felt heavier than before, the kind that settles after the shouting stops. The following week, I went back to the dam site one last time. The cleanup crews were gone now, and the valley had started to dry out, though it still smelled faintly of algae and rust. The sun was warm again, and grass had already begun to poke through the cracked mud. Nature, in its quiet arrogance, was already reclaiming what had been taken from it. I walked along the edge of what used to be the lake, following the faint stream that trickled through the center. The birds had returned too, perching on broken posts and driftwood. It was peaceful in a way that felt wrong, like walking through the aftermath of a fire when only ashes remain. I stopped where the dam once stood and stared at the remnants of the wall, jagged and broken, jutting up like teeth. A family of ducks floated nearby in the shallow water, unconcerned with the human disaster around them. I realized then that the land didn't care who was right or wrong. It never had. The mountain didn't punish or forgive. It simply reset. All of this destruction, all of this noise, and in a few years the forest would grow back, the water would find new paths, and no one would remember the names on those HOA forms. But I would. I pulled out my phone and filmed one last short video, panning slowly across the valley, the silence, the broken dam, and the faint green starting to bloom. "This is what happens when warnings are ignored," I said quietly. "Not because nature's cruel, but because it's patient." When I stopped recording, I didn't upload it anywhere. Some truths don't need more audiences, they just need to be remembered. On my way back, I passed Dale's cruiser parked near the temporary roadblock. He waved me down and leaned out the window. "County's finalizing the report," he said. "Looks like the board's done for good. Karen's already resigned, though it won't save her." "Where's she now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Checked into a hotel in town. Word is she's selling what's left of her property to cover legal fees. Her husband's gone." I nodded slowly. "Guess the HOA finally dissolved itself." He chuckled dryly. "In more ways than one." I drove back up the ridge as the evening light turned everything gold. The valley looked almost beautiful again in that glow, like it had forgiven us. But I knew better. It wasn't forgiveness, it was indifference. I sat on my porch that night, watching the mist rise where the lake used to be, and thought about how strange it was that peace can look exactly like aftermath. The world had moved on, the news cycle already chasing something else, but here the silence stayed, vast and absolute. I poured a cup of coffee, set my phone aside, and listened to the steady trickle of the new stream below. It sounded like time itself, slow and certain, carving its way forward, not caring what we'd built or ruined along the way. Spring returned quietly, the way it always did in the mountains, with fog rolling low across the valley and the faint smell of pine needles carried on the thawing wind. Where the lake had once stretched wide and shimmering, there was now a winding stream cutting through fields of new grass, its edges dotted with wildflowers that hadn't bloomed there in decades. The land was healing faster than anyone thought possible, as if eager to erase the memory of what had happened. My cabin stood higher than before, rebuilt with stronger beams and a wider porch overlooking what was left of the valley. The silence that had once felt oppressive now felt earned, like a peace bought with too high a price. I spent most days repairing fences, planting new trees, and occasionally walking down to the stream with Scout trotting beside me. The water was clear now, cold and gentle, murmuring softly over the stones. Nature had a way of making tragedy feel temporary, even when people couldn't. The HOA was gone, dissolved entirely by court order, its assets seized and its members scattered like the debris that once floated in the flood. Karen had disappeared after the trials, though rumors said she'd moved to another state, living quietly under her maiden name. I never checked to confirm it. Some stories didn't need sequels. Sheriff Dale still stopped by sometimes, always in uniform even though his jurisdiction was quieter than ever. He'd sit on the porch with me, sipping coffee, staring at the valley in silence before muttering, "Hard to believe it used to be full of water." I'd nod, watching the sunlight glint on the stream below. Hard to believe anyone thought they could control it. He'd grunt in agreement, then change the subject to fishing or weather, never the dam, Never the lawsuits, never the funerals. We both knew there was nothing left to say about it. One afternoon, months later, I found an envelope wedged under my cabin door. It was damp from the morning mist and had no return address, just my name scrawled across the front in uneven handwriting. Inside was a short note. It said, "You were right. I should have listened. I hope you find peace here." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. The handwriting, neat yet shaky, was unmistakably Karen's. I read it twice, folded it back, and set it inside a drawer without anger or satisfaction. She had lost everything trying to control what never belonged to her: the land, the water, the people. And yet in that one sentence there was something almost human again, something that had been missing from her voice when she stood in front of the dam pretending everything was fine. I didn't forgive her, but I understood her, and that was enough. The following week I started digging near the old dam site, clearing out what was left of the foundation. The county had left it untouched, considering it too expensive to rebuild, so I decided to turn it into something else. A pond, smaller and safer, fed naturally by the stream. It wasn't for vanity or profit, just a way to let the water exist on its own terms again. I worked alone for weeks, hauling stones, planting reeds, shaping the banks until the pond reflected the sky like glass. It wasn't the lake we'd lost, but it was alive, and that felt like a kind of victory. Word spread slowly, and before long a few former residents began returning, not to rebuild their houses, but to see what remained. Some of them brought their kids, who played near the stream and skipped rocks, their laughter echoing where the HOA once held its meetings. No one mentioned the flood. It was as if the land itself had issued a silent rule: remember quietly, rebuild differently. One man, a retired teacher who'd lived down near the old boat ramp, stopped by to shake my hand. "You tried to save us," he said, eyes wet. "We didn't believe you. Guess we all learned the hard way." I shrugged. "We all did what we thought was right. That's the problem." He smiled faintly. "Still, I'm glad you stayed. Feels like someone should." When he left, I watched his truck disappear around the bend, thinking about what he said. Maybe staying wasn't about stubbornness anymore. Maybe it was about witnessing, making sure the story didn't fade into a rumor of weather and bad luck. By summer, the valley had transformed again. Grass grew waist-high where mud once clung like tar. Deer wandered freely through the meadows, and at dusk the fireflies returned, blinking over the water like tiny lanterns. I'd built a small dock beside the pond, a simple wooden platform that extended just far enough to sit and dangle my feet. Some evenings I'd bring a fishing rod, though I rarely caught anything. It wasn't about catching. It was about listening. The sound of the water trickling through the stones had become something like a heartbeat, steady and forgiving. Sometimes I'd imagine the dam still there, imagine the echo of the old HOA meetings drifting across the water, Karen's voice calling for order, the clatter of coffee cups and forced laughter. Then I'd open my eyes and see the truth: the wildflowers, the unchained stream, the sun melting into the horizon, and I'd realize the best order was no order at all. One night, near the anniversary of the collapse, a storm rolled in again, not as fierce as the one before but enough to rattle the windows. I went outside, standing on the porch with the rain washing over me, and watched the valley shimmer with silver threads of water. For a moment, fear flickered through me, an echo of that night when the mountain had roared. But the stream held steady, flowing strong and free, not trapped behind walls or painted lies. I realized then that I no longer hated the sound of rain. It no longer felt like a warning, it sounded like renewal. When the storm passed, dawn broke clear and golden. Mist clung to the valley floor, and the pond shimmered like a mirror. I walked down with a cup of coffee, Scout trotting beside me, and sat on the dock as sunlight spilled over the ridge. The air was cool, filled with birdsong and the distant rustle of wind through new trees. I thought about everything that had been lost: homes, pride, people, and everything that had survived despite it all. The mountain had taught its lesson in the only language it knew: consequence. But it had also offered a second chance to those willing to listen. As the light grew brighter, I watched the reflection of the sky ripple on the surface of the pond and said softly to no one in particular, "You were right, Grandpa. Water always wins." Then I smiled, not bitterly this time, but with a quiet acceptance that felt like peace. The land didn't need fences or rules or boards to tell it what it could be. It just needed time and patience and the humility of people who finally understood that control is an illusion. The wind rose gently, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, and somewhere in that breeze, the valley seemed to breathe again, whole and alive. I finished my coffee, stood, and looked once more at the water glinting in the sun before turning back toward the cabin. The world was calm now, but I knew better than to take that for granted. The mountain was always watching, patient as ever, waiting for someone else to forget. But for now the only sound was the steady, peaceful rhythm of the stream, whispering its eternal reminder through the valley. Nature never forgets and it never forgives, but it always, eventually, restores.